The last 4 years have been incredibly challenging, but in fact, I think they've actually been incredibly empowering. From my perspective, for way too long, the labor movement became stagnant. We looked at ourselves and we became service organizations, and we traded off an awful lot to get other types of laws. So when we lost fair share here, that was a trade-off. If you think about it, all the way back to the 1930s, not quite the same concept, but in the 1930s, in 1932, when they passed the National Labor Relations Act, that was done due to a strike that was occurring in the pork and the butcher industry up in the Chicagoland area and in Minneapolis. And what would happen is that any time there was, and the labor historians will say you're wrong, John, but that's okay. It's a good story anyway. That anytime there was a grievance or a problem with the contract, they didn't have a grievance solution. They would use their power of the membership to force a change. So that if you were harmed, all of us were harmed, and that might mean that we might walk out that day until you're right. We became soft in one sense over that, in that we allowed the process of the grievance process, the process of fair share, to turn us into an insurance program. That if you had an issue, you paid your dues and we would cover you. If you didn't want to be part of it, you cover us. And over the last 4 years, we've seen that model just doesn't work, that we've given up way too much power. On Tuesday afternoon, I was up in the Chicagoland area, and as you know, the UPI spends, when we have a meeting up in the Chicagoland area, be it a House of Delegates meeting, or if we have to bring up members to testify for whatever committee, we stay at the Crowne Plaza. The Crowne Plaza Metro, right there on that, is an amazing hotel, very nice individuals. It's always very clean, but it was always labor friendly. And as you might be familiar with now, there is an ongoing strike. They are now entering into their third week. So we did what union does. The Unite Hire folks who are on strike, Local 1, have supported us in our battles for higher education over the last 2 years. But we also said, because these are our friends, these are people who we rely on. They're the folks who have cleaned our rooms. These are folks who service in the bars or in the restaurants, that we're going to stand in solidarity with them. And they were completely blown away when I pulled up in, Tamara Morris drove, Tamara, Kathy, Steve Frankel, and I came in one car, and the three of us had to drop out because there was no place to park. But we three jumped out of the car and pulled out a big giant cooler that had Cokes and sodas and about 10 pizzas. The folks that were on that picket line were just floored that here is this University Professionals of Illinois showing up to walk the picket line, but equally important, to bring them a meal so that we would eat together. And on the sidewalks of the city of Chicago, we all joined together and had a meal of lunch as we continued to walk. I was asking them, what is the strike about? Right? I hear on WTTW, I've talked to their leadership, and I said, but you're on strike, why? What is it? And their answer was quite amazing, because it's the same thing we're fighting constantly. It was health insurance costs are going through the roof, and in fact, when they get laid off, which several of our members have been laid off, or many of our civil service employees that we represent get laid off during the summer, they lose their health insurance. And all they wanted was simply to have access to health insurance for 12 months out of the year, regardless of whether or not it's slow at the hotel or not. And then the second thing they were fighting over was workload. Simple as that. It wasn't about trying to increase their pay. Many of them are not paid particularly well. But they were standing there because they were being asked to clean more and more rooms, taking away other people's jobs, and they couldn't physically do it anymore. And so they said, we don't cut corners, and I believe them, but we're getting to the point that if they continue to increase the number of rooms. So one person I talked to, she has in an 8-hour shift or so, has to clean 18 suites, which is 36 rooms if you think about it. Suite is always 2 rooms plus a bathroom, and in some cases a bath and a half. Imagine trying to do that in an 8.5 hour or an 8-hour shift. You can't. And they wanted to increase her. This is what we're facing here with our colleagues at the hotels, but it's also the same things that we've been facing. So, as you know, the story of Janus. Mark Janus, the Rauner actually brought the lawsuit first. The court said, you don't have standing. So they went out and recruited somebody to do this against us. You can talk about Mark Janus and who he is and what he wanted all you want, but in reality, it was the Rauners of the world, it was the IPI of the world, it was all these groups that are anti-labor that they're trying to cut the one voice of workers that's a solid voice, and that's labor. They've done everything they possibly could to try to limit us. And we've seen it in Michigan, we've seen it in Wisconsin, and they now had a court that didn't look at the law but was ideologically bound, and they pushed this court through for the second time. This case had no hearings at the lower circuit levels. They just said, you can't rule against us. If the abode is, we'll fight it at the Supreme Court. There was no testimony. There was nothing. It's never, ever heard in the Supreme Court, with the exception of Gore versus Bush. But outside of that, this is the first time it's happened. They expected people to drop cards, to quit their membership like that. Because why would you pay for something that you could get free? Not understanding the power of labor. UPI 2 years in advance, 3 years in advance, because of everything that you have done, right? We have been facing the governor heads down. We have been on the front line against this person who's been attacking higher education, who's now out there saying he's going to invest millions of dollars or hundreds of million dollars into higher education. Like, anybody believe that at this room? I don't think so. We've been on the front lines with this, and our members knew what we were able to do. And let's think about what we were able to do. In those 2.5 years of a non-budget, because of labor power, not because of somebody's dues that they paid, but because of us, people here at this table, how many times were we outside Reggie Phillips' office? The most amazing thing was when Reggie voted for that budget and then ran away. Voted and took right out of that building because he knew he had no choice to do that. That wasn't caused by dues. That wasn't caused because of a law. That was caused by membership showing up and fighting back. Over those 2.5 years, we turned in collectively over 60,000 postcards to both state representatives, state senators, and governors. We rallied outside of offices. We had a massive rally joining our partners with Chicago Teachers Union on April 1st. And while we were rallying in Chicago on that day, we had smaller rallies at Eastern and at Western, at UIS. Every one of our campuses had some type of event on that first kickoff of this statewide attempt to demonstrate the power of union. But what doesn't get talked about as much on the April 1st is everybody looks at it and says it was the Chicago Teachers Union that went on strike, and they did. But where were the big rallies at? They were at Northeastern. They were at Chicago State. They were at the University of Illinois, Chicago. That's where the rallies were. We had 4,000 or 5,000 people. We shut down the streets. Our membership went out and walked out to the schools that were there and brought the striking teachers to it. It was an amazing parade. I was supposed to be there for an hour and a half. I ended up being there for 2.5 hours because there were so many people there. There were helicopters flying around as we filled the quad at Northeastern with people there saying, we want to have funding. Enough of this. Chicago State, same thing. Jumped into the car. They drove me over to Chicago State, and there was another 1,000 standing on there. Karen Lewis, President CTU, joined because they recognized the importance of Chicago State and higher education. Students across. And then we marched out and walked through the streets around the Chicago State campus. This is an amazing community that's been devastated by what this governor has done to higher education in Chicago State. This campus is falling apart, but it's an amazing school. There are amazing faculty, staff, students. There are some premier quality programs there, and this institution has been under attack, but it took us to push back. Another 1,000. We got on the red line then, and the rally didn't end. This was the fun part of April 1st, and the story of April 1st is that we all got onto the red line, which is the train that goes down to the McCormick place. And we continued the rally on the trains, talking to whoever would listen to us about higher education funding or K through 12 funding or what the governor was doing to human services. And this was early on about the power of youth. And then there were 10,000 people or so outside the Thompson Center. It was the most amazing place to ever stand up and speak, to see all these thousands of people filling into it. On a lousy, rainy day, we did that. So then we decided we're going to continue our pressure. We brought that campaign back to our campuses. Again, it was people. It was our membership. It was all of us working together to arrange this. And we continued with the postcard campaign. And we continued then with putting up posts with flyers, stand up to Rauner, for Reggie Phillips, say no to Rauner, stand up, put up, and sign petitions, join us. We rallied outside all of these offices to continue the pressure, and we were able to finally push them at least to get some type of budget so that our students wouldn't be leaving. But the governor still continued to veto everything, all because he was trying to attack public sector unions. This is all this battle was about, was attacking public sector unions. He couldn't get his reforms that he wanted. Even when he tried to get the right to work in smaller communities, we rallied, pushed back, and got him to change. When even the ones here, when they signed that petition, took 40 people outside that city hall meeting to change the city council's decision on that. That came because of people. That didn't come because of some law or some dues or some grievance process. It came because we focused on that issue. Then we decided we're going to shut down Springfield if we have to. We're going to teach out at our institutions because we still hadn't been funded. People were talking about higher education, but not at the level we needed them to say, look, our institutions are falling apart. So as a group, we organized the teach out, April 27th. And we had 1,300 people in the rotunda sitting there teaching each other, telling each other the experiences. When we first started planning this back in November or October, I remember folks, some of our colleagues and our partners, like, you're not going to be able to accomplish. Do something smaller. Look at the institutions. Like, no. Our members have power. We can show up in the rotunda in Springfield and push back. We did it. We had a partnership of 30-plus different organizations that joined us through the Fund Our Future Coalition, which was a combination that started between Illinois Education Association, the IEA, and us. We formed this organization to push back and demand funding for our institution, for our students, so that our students would have a quality higher education that they deserve and what pushes our state forward. We had 1,200 folks on that rotunda floor. State reps and state senators heard that higher ed was going to be in the House. They didn't expect higher ed in the House at all as to what they ended up doing. Several of them weren't going to come out because they were in session or in hearing, and then they started hearing us. And suddenly I got this phone call, and they said, "Is that you out there?" And I said, "Yes, it is. Why aren't you out here with us?" And suddenly state reps started coming out, state senators started coming out and walking and sitting. A couple of them even sat down with us. The gubernatorial candidates, Pritzker was there, came and walked around and talked. Senator Biss came and talked and walked around to it. And then we moved outside and rallied. But what occurred earlier were two other rallies. That while we were inside, there were two rallies outside of students, of voices, a partner of us who was fighting to stop the incarceration of high school students and junior high school students from being incarcerated because of something that they might have done at school, so that they could stay in school so that they can get their degrees. These are our partners, is why we support them. We had the Greater Chicago Islamic Organization earlier celebrating or working with us. I went to their breakfast and joined them at their breakfast because their issue was they were being discriminated against. And we were able to try to push that law, which we eventually was able to get pushed through. These are the challenges that we can show you that when we work together, these challenges are actually opportunities. And that's what Janus's case is really about. It's not about what the IPI says or what Ronner says. It's the fact that it has had the opposite impact. It has joined us. So when you asked me the other day to come here and talk a little bit about what the UPI looks like post-Janus, my answer is that we're stronger, we're bigger, we're faster, we're smarter, and we're damn determined to get what we want to get done, and that is protect our higher education systems. Why? Because we've done it, and we can do it again. And we will continue to do it. Today, we're sitting here, right? We have 3 members running for office. We have Shirley Bell, Christine, John. We have members here that are running for office in this town. We have John Curtis running again out of Macomb. We have Paul Stoddard running in DeKalb. And we have our 2 incumbents, Nick Smith, who's a former member of the UPI, is now an associate member. He's a state rep in the Chicago state area. And Laura Fine, who's moving from state rep to the state senate, who is also a member of the UPI and now an associate member to do so.
Shirley Bell knows of another one that we just found out.
We have another member running?
Olga Abella.
Olga is a member too? I didn't know that.
She's running for county board in Oblong.
Well, we got to get a hold of Olga. But this is what we've talked about, is that we're going to stop relying on other people representing us. We're going to represent us. Over the last 6 months, 8 months, we asked the chapters to go out and talk to people, just to have one-on-one conversations and explain the importance of what it is that we do. Folks that may never have signed their card, sign their card. We went from an organization of a membership around 78 or so, all the way up to the mid-80%. In many cases, we're over 90% membership. We have held that. We've lost maybe 14, 15 members, but we've picked up over 28, 30 members on top of that. We are in negotiations right now for the first time at Northern Illinois University for the tenure track faculty. We are in negotiations at Chicago State. We're in negotiations at Governor State. This is member power. Rauner wanted to see the demise of public higher education. He wanted to see the demise of public employees. He actually created the opposite. He woke us all back up to the challenges of what started this organization to begin with. And that's what we need to continue to do. We need to continue because we're not done. We want Pritzker to be elected because he actually has an agenda for higher education that we could support. I don't know if you saw on Wednesday afternoon, he was at Illinois State and unveiled the first time he started to unveil his proposals for higher education. It includes increasing the AIM High. It includes increasing funding. It includes MAP funding. Significant increases in all of these, including funding for the institutions. That's a good start. But we need to make Illinois higher education competitive again. And that's my challenge to all of the memberships now is, will you join us in this demand? Not a small investment into higher education, but almost a $4 billion investment in higher education over the next couple of years that drives the price of tuition down. It shouldn't be that you can go to Indiana school for less money than it costs to go to an Eastern school. First off, you're making a mistake by leaving EIU and going to an Indiana school because EIU is a much better institution by far. All right, we know. I'm talking to you all. I've met many of you. I've been on this campus. We know the quality of the programs that are here. But a student shouldn't be making a decision based on price. They should be making a decision based on the quality of education and what their career goals are. If they make that type of decision, if they have the opportunity to make that type of decision, they're going to pick an Eastern, they're going to pick a Western or Chicago State over and over and over again because we did have the premier higher education system in the state or in the country. We can have it again if we actually invest in it. That means investing in our students and making sure that we are competitive, which means that the price of tuition must come down. We have sponsored legislation for 2 years now that puts money that says any increase in funding for higher education, 50% of that must go towards the decrease in tuition costs for our students. We have to continue that, but we want to expand it. We want to create the higher education competitive scholarship program that says that we are compete so that Eastern's price is less expensive than Indiana, than Kentucky, et cetera, down the line, and is funded by the state of Illinois so that a student can make a choice to come to Eastern because they want to come to Eastern, not being forced to leave. We're losing 45% of our graduating high school students every year out of the state of Illinois. They talk about population decline. This is where the population decline is. If you look at the numbers of students that have left the state of Illinois versus the decrease in population, it's here. It's in higher ed. When a student leaves our state to go to another school, they're no longer counted as a resident in the state of Illinois. They're counted underneath census rules or census at that institution as to where they are. Of course our population is declining. And what happens when they leave? They don't come back. They get recruited by businesses there. Their families are there. They form their families. They create their new businesses in those areas. They don't come back, and we see an even greater decline, and we decrease the competitiveness of our state economically, right? We're trying to the state is trying to fight for Amazon. Like Amazon, hate Amazon. We obviously have serious concerns with their labor practices, as is being reported. We also don't think state taxes should be used for these corporations that are making billions and billions of dollars. But that being said, one of the reasons why they're looking at Illinois is because of the quality of higher education. They want schools. We've talked to another state representative who's running up in the Chicagoland area, and she worked for a big pharmaceutical industry school, not a store, retail store. And she said they were going to outsource, they were thinking about this about 5, 6, 7 years ago, to outsource a lot of their research and out to Texas, where it was cheaper. And the reason why they stayed here is because of a higher education programs that we actually have pharmaceutical schools, not just at U of I, but also at a Chicago State. These are really good programs that we need to be fostering and increasing and investing so that we can do it. I asked her, I said, what do you think would happen today? Because I think we might have made a different decision. How many jobs would we have lost because of that? But equally important at a time where we have been watching this debacle on the Supreme Court, the fighting, the anger, the division. A president who is a bully to no end, trying to bully people his way, doesn't care whether or not he's telling the truth or not telling the truth. Where we have more racial discord, more gender discord, more discrimination than we've ever seen at the surface. Right there, people aren't afraid to hide it anymore. What are we forcing our institutions to do? cut the key programs that deal with social justice. Departments of philosophy are underneath attack. We've lost one already. Women's studies, African American studies, the courses that teach social justice, they're under attack. They're being cut, they're being eliminated, just as society is demanding these type of things. We have to operate together and fight back against this. And we can because we are a union. That we put the needs of our students, our institutions, and work collectively, and that's where the real power is. We need to stop being afraid of our power and exercise our power. But our power isn't just one person standing up and speaking. It's not Jeannie leading the way at Eastern. It's all of us in the room. It's not just Audrey leading the room from our retirees. It is all of us fighting back to maintain a professional workplace that is conducive for our learning, for our students, and attracts the quality of students that we want to have, which is all the students in Illinois. We want them to stay here because we know that what we can offer them. We need to stop playing these games, these bureaucratic games, where we allow the universities to be treated like businesses. They're not businesses. I travel around this state constantly. I put on my car on average about 35,000 miles a year, driving just to our institutions. This state of Illinois is really big, and we have some state reps and some state senators. We have an IBHE who thinks we should consolidate our institutions to eliminate programs because, well, you know, you might have a really good program at Eastern. We shouldn't have that same program at Western. It's a 3-hour drive back and forth between the two. How's the resident in Charleston going to take the class in Macomb? How's the resident in Macomb going to take the class in Charleston? How about the same for Chicago? We have Chicago State, Governor State, Northeastern, U of I. You have 4 institutions right there. Can't we merge all those together? I drive in that traffic. You can't get from Governor State to Northeastern in an hour. It takes about 2.5 hours. That's even using public transportation. It takes that long. Our institutions are perfectly set up in this state. We need to say that stop playing these games. Stop saying we need to reform after you have starved us. You have starved us for over 2 decades. It's not just Governor Rauner's fault. This is both parties for the last 2 decades who have done this to us. Governor Rauner just made it substantially worse and made it to the point where we just couldn't barely survive. How many institutions were on the verge of cutting or closing? I know. I experienced that. You experienced that because your institution was one of them. The challenge now in front of us is to say we need to have real funding, then we can come back and look at the different types of programs that can be done. Don't cut us until you fund us. Don't try to reform us until you actually fund us back to where we were, because you will see the students coming in droves back to our institutions. They want to stay here. They want to stay in Illinois. That's where mom and dad are. That's where mom is. That's where grandma and grandpa is. That's where our families are. They want to be close to their families. We need to continue it. So when folks say, how did the UPI survive Janus? My answer to is Janus is just a blimp in it. It's not a challenge. What is a challenge is us deciding that we want to have more power to improve our quality of our schools, to improve the careers of our membership, and to divine a secure retirement. Enough of the attacks on us. Let's demand real funding. I'm done playing defense. It's time to go on the offense and demand an investment. So that's Janus, and that's what Janus did to us. So in a weird sense, thank you, Mark Janus, but the reality here is thank you to all of us, because we decided that we were going to work and organize together to have the power that we need to push back, to get our membership elected in office, to push back against administrations, and to push the legislature to do what's right for Illinois, what's right for our students. That's what I have to say about higher education and post-Janus and the UPI.